Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. Today, in honor of Pride Month, I'm going to be sharing with you 10 queer science fiction and fantasy books targeted at an adult audience that I'm a fan of. Previously, I did 10 queer YA sci-fi fantasy books. I'll link that video up above if you haven't seen it yet, but for today, I'm going to recommend some adult titles that I love. First up is one of my favorite books that I read this year. This is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. It is a debut sci-fi romance between two men with a political arranged marriage. There's also kind of a mystery plot driving this. I loved this a whole lot. I loved the characters. If you are a romance reader interested in getting into science fiction, this might be a great one to try out. It's a good crossover book. I would say it's like 50% romance, 50% sci-fi. I have a whole standalone video review about it, so I'm not going to gush about it too much. You can check out that video if you want to hear more, but I love this and I would recommend. Another one of my favorite books that I read this year was Malice by Heather Walter. This is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, where the evil sorceress falls in love with the princess. I love it. It's also kind of a villain backstory, which I'm also a fan of. We have a broody, morally gray main character because it's from the perspective of the potentially evil sorceress, and oh my god, the ending, like, burn the world down and then leave us on a cliffhanger needing book 2 because it's going to be a duology. So I loved this. I thought it was phenomenal. Next is a book that I adore so much, and I think it's kind of underappreciated. This is The Queens of Inislier by Tessa Gratton. It is a queer fantasy reimagining of King Lear by Shakespeare. This is quite slow-paced. I will say it takes its time with the description, building the world, building the characters. If you're looking for a plot-driven narrative, this is probably not going to be your cup of tea because it's much more slow. I loved it. I thought the writing was beautiful, and actually I also listened to the audiobook, and the narrator is really, really good. I think that the characters in this are so nuanced. It follows 3 sisters who are the daughters of King Lear, and they're all very different from each other. This is one that I should reread at some point in the future. In fact, I actually loved it enough that there's a girl who runs an Etsy shop where she'll do painting on books, and so I got her to make me a special painted edition where each side represents one of the 3 sisters. So we have the stars on top for the youngest sister who, like, gets prophecy from the stars. We have a tree for the middle sister who's more of like a witch in touch with nature, etc. And then on the bottom we have a sword for the oldest sister who is very militant and, you know, maybe if she lived in another world would have been trans or non-binary. So very, very interesting book. I loved it a lot, and I would love to see more people read it. My next recommendation is one that is definitely polarizing. It seems to be a book that most people either love or hate, and a lot of it is about whether or not you like the main character, okay? I adore the main character, and it totally has my sense of humor. One of my favorite books is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, so I tend to recommend to people if you can get it from your library or get a preview and read a few chapters and get a sense of the tone and the vibe and see if you like Gideon, because book 1 is all from Gideon's perspective. Like, that's going to give you a good sense of whether this may or may not be the book for you. It is a really interesting genre blend where it's set in space. It's like loosely sci-fi. I would say book 2 in the series has a lot more sci-fi elements than book 1. Book 1 reads more like a fantasy blended with mystery and horror. Like, it ends up becoming a like isolated closed circle murder mystery, plus there's a lot of like body horror and horror elements, plus there's fantasy elements, and it's set in space. So like, it's an interesting genre blend. I loved it. This has a lot of style. And it's not everyone's cup of tea. I was a huge fan, and I actually think book 2 is brilliant, but a mind trip. I have a standalone review for that, actually for both of these, but for that one I'll link it up above if you want to hear more about it. But if you've tried reading Harrow the Ninth and you're confused, don't worry, you're supposed to be. Probably the first half of the book, I was very confused and disoriented and like, wait, what is happening? But don't worry, eventually it will all make sense, and then you will think that she is an absolutely brilliant author and won't be able to wait for book 3. like me, because we're not getting it till 2022, which is really a bummer. But highly recommend. This tends to get pitched as lesbian necromancers in space, which is accurate, but I see people being annoyed because when they hear that, they expect there to be a lesbian romance. It is not. It is a book about necromancers in space who happen to be lesbians. So just to set your expectations, but I thought it was phenomenal. All right, next up we have the first book in one of my all-time favorite series by one of my all-time favorite authors. That, of course, is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This has quite a lot of queer characters in it. It's not the main focus of the book necessarily, but there is a lot of representation. In fact, there is a polyamorous relationship in this book, one of the few in literature that I've ever really fully rooted for. I was part of a whole panel discussion for the World Hoppers channel where we gushed about N.K. Jemisin and her books and this series. So I'm gonna actually link that video up above because I don't wanna like get deeply into it here, but I adore this series so much. I think it is a freaking masterpiece. I'm really excited because I'm planning a read-along this fall, and yeah, I think it's gonna be great, so highly recommend. Everyone should read this. My next recommendation is definitely a tome, but a good one. This is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. It is a standalone. I actually kind of think this would have been better as a duology, to be perfectly honest, because it has some like pacing things that aren't perfect, but I still really loved it. It's got a lot of politics, it's got dragons, it's got a sapphic romance. If you like epic fantasy and you like dragons and you like politics, it is worth the read, even if it's a brick. It's very good. The audiobook is good. I might recommend the audiobook. Yeah. Oh, we're running out of battery. Let's change that. My next recommendation is one that I read pretty recently. This is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nhi Vo. This is a really interesting book. It's a reimagining of The Great Gatsby from the perspective of Jordan Baker, with Jordan Baker being a Vietnamese immigrant. It also makes pretty much all of the main characters in the story queer in some way, which is a really interesting approach to complicating the narrative. And I think what this book does is it pulls on a lot of the subtext of the original book on issues of race, potential readings of queerness among some of the characters, and makes those more explicit in a world that has some fantastical elements to it. There is a bit of magic, and this has kind of a dreamlike quality to it when you read it. It's really interesting, really smart. I think this is gonna be one that a lot of people are gonna love. My next recommendation is a sci-fi book that is gonna come with a caveat in that there are many content or trigger warnings for this book, and it can be quite bleak, but I think it's also kind of brilliant. This is An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. It is an intensely character-driven piece of science fiction with genderqueer main characters. It's set on a spaceship that is highly segregated by class and race and gender, and is very oppressive, deeply homophobic. It's a very brutal place. If you want to see all of the content warnings for this, I would check out my Goodreads review. My Goodreads is always linked in the video description down below. Yeah, I was not expecting this book to be as dark and bleak and intense as it was, although the darkness and bleakness is punctuated by moments of human connection and warmth. Yeah, it's a really interesting book, and so if it sounds like something that would be up your alley, it's worth a try. My next recommendation is one that apparently is not everybody's cup of tea, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was like a rollicking good time. This is American Hippo by Sarah Gailey. It is a bind-up of 2 novellas and 2 short stories, all set in this alternate American history. I thought this was really fun. I met Sarah Gailey at an event and they pitched this book to me, and I was like, well, yeah, I need to read this. And I ended up adoring it. I did try giving it to my friend Leanna from Leanna's Library for a TBR swap video, and she was not a fan, but I really love it, so maybe some of you will also love it. The entire premise of this is based on the fact that in actual American history, there was a proposed bill that would import hippos to raise like cattle essentially for meat production, which is apparently a really terrible idea if you know anything about hippos for a lot of reasons, and it never got passed. But this book imagines what if it did happen and now there's a bunch of feral hippos who need to be herded down the Mississippi River. And so you have kind of a diverse ragtag crew of people who are hired to herd these feral hippos down the Mississippi River, and I just thought this was really fun and funny. I liked the characters, I liked all of the diversity and the silliness. It's like, I thought it was a pretty good time. So, for your consideration, American Hippo. All right. My final recommendation for this video is really an entire author, but I'm going to specifically talk about one book, and the author is Becky Chambers. This is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Becky Chambers writes queer, soft sci-fi for the most part. There are some exceptions. She does have some that's a little more like intensely sci-fi, but this book in particular is really just soft and character driven, and it's like feel good sci-fi. I just love it. It's about like hanging out with this crew of quirky, diverse people on a spaceship as they make their way through space and kind of have escapades, but it's really about like hanging out with the crew. I loved it. It made me really happy. If you need a lot of plot and action, this may not be your cup of tea, but if like a character-driven, soft, feel-good sci-fi book sounds good to you, definitely worth a try. So there you go. Those are 10 queer sci-fi and fantasy books for adults that I really loved, and I hope some of you will as well. I hope something here piqued your interest. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about in this video, and for your question of the day, recommend to me a book that you would recommend. If there are people on this video looking for queer sci-fi fantasy books, what is a book that you think they should definitely give a try to? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more, and if you want to support the work of the channel, check out the Patreon link down below or check out channel memberships if you are so inclined. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.